Welcome to the Outthinkers Podcast. Plug into fascinating minds and breakthrough ideas that are transforming industries and the world. I'm your host, Kyan Krippendorf, founder of Outthinker Networks, a global think tank comprised of corporate strategists, innovators, and entrepreneurs that are shaping the future of business. If this describes you, join us at outthinker.com. Now, let's dive into this week's episode.
Now, here's the thing. The very same moment that we need to take a risk to be high performing, our brain, which has been designed to protect the body, save, survive, our brain defaults to protection, not risk in that same moment. And so there's this conflict. We call it the fundamental conflict of performance. And unless you can get over that and get really underneath that, people will not take risks.
That was Pawliw-Fry, who, beyond being a world-renowned keynote speaker and New York Times bestselling author, also coaches military, Navy SEALs, professional athletes, and their coaches on high performance. As the founder of IHHP and an expert in culture, leadership, and emotional intelligence, JP has helped some of the most successful Fortune 100 companies unlock their potential by fostering courageous, high-performing cultures. As you heard in the highlighted clip, JP's research has led him to help organizations cultivate high-performing cultures by enabling employees to overcome fear and feel valued, have a voice, and feel safe to take risks and be courageous. Based on his insights from his book, Performing Under Pressure, we had a fascinating discussion on the intersection of culture with individual psychology to create high-performing cultures. In this episode, we discuss how pressure, and specifically cortisol, affects our perception and why the idea that we work better under pressure, performing well under pressure, is a fallacy. His theory of the 8% gap, how humans are programmed to perform well in 92% of the cases and then switch to either avoid or make a mess mode when they get to the last 8%. How you as a leader and an organization can enable people to operate in that high-performing 8% range. And why the right unit of measure of culture is not your organization or even your business unit, but your team, and what the implications of this are for culture change. An interesting model for assessing culture that, since interviewing JP, I have seen come up over and over again. Ladies and gentlemen, JP Pawliw-Fry. Well, JP, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. I know you've got a very busy schedule, and we really appreciate you being here.
Oh, it's totally my pleasure.
So I want to open up with the same two questions I always ask. First is, this is just to get to know you personally, may have nothing to do with your work. If you can complete this sentence for me, if you really know me, you know that.
Oh, this is easy. If you really know me, you know that I am obsessed about the New Zealand All Black rugby team. So much so that, by the way, last night they played England. They played it on Saturday, but I was so busy. I watched it last night, tape delayed. I'm so obsessed that I leave Wednesday to Dublin to watch them play Ireland this Friday. That's how crazy I am. And I've been to the last 6, I think, since 2003 Rugby World Cups.
Second question is, because this is a podcast that specializes in strategy, and you do strategy for mental strategy, military strategy, sports strategy, coaching strategy, culture strategy, people strategy, business strategy. What is your definition of strategy?
I think I probably have less of a good answer on this one, to be honest.
We always get a different answer. That's
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, we're big believers that the long-term difference maker is culture. If you have a good strategy, people can, over time, copy it. If you've got good product, people can. If it's differentiated and adding up, people can copy it. But culture is not something you can copy because of and we'll talk about this, because of how it develops. It's unique to the experiences within that organization. You can't copy. People say, we want to have a culture like Google or Goldman or McKinsey, whoever, it doesn't matter. No, you actually can't copy it, which is something I hope everyone who's listening really gets, because that becomes then your point of difference, your competitive advantage. So I don't know if I can answer the question on strategy, but more so bring it back to what drives the execution of strategy. Because here's what we know. When we talk to organizations and CEOs or, strategy, CIOs or folks who are on the strategy side, You don't work on your culture because it's a nice to have, because, oh, we should have a nice culture. No, you do it because for one reason only, to help you execute your strategy more effectively. That's it. Your people are so busy. They don't need something that's like a fluff. Oh, I'll check a box. No, they need something that in their very busy lives will help them deliver, execute, get results quicker, faster, with less drama. And that's how culture and strategy come together.
Yeah. No, I think that sounds exactly right. We did a session for some of our chief strategy officers. We were talking about leadership and culture with a former CEO of a big company. And that's sort of where it came down to, is like, culture is not just about everyone being happy and everyone loving each other. It is about, there's strong culture that aligns with strategy, that encourages whatever the behaviors and choices that are aligned with the strategy. So I want to get into the 8%. I want to get into what people get wrong about culture and about the role of pressure in shaping. But first, I know that you taught at Kellogg and were ranked as one of the most popular professors there. And what was your class called? And what
was my mom did those rankings. So not a lot of credibility there. So what I taught was leadership, specifically how to lead under pressure, specifically how to manage your brain under pressure. And that was the kind of focus. And yeah, I loved my time there. I'm not teaching there anymore. As kind of like you, I'm so busy with traveling. I couldn't do it. And so I had to choose to.
Yeah. I heard you talk about the power of teaching as a way of learning too. So I'm going to leave for Paraguay tomorrow, and I teach a 3-day, 8-hour-a-day class. And it is a great excuse to get my thinking straight about the things I'm teaching.
Oh, it's so true. And there's two parts to this that I think you might be alluding to. One is, for anyone out there listening, the best way to get your head around some content is to teach it yourself. So if you're thinking strategy or you're thinking culture or whatever in your organization, listener, the best way for you to really internalize it is to reteach it. No question. But what you're saying, I think, is exactly true too. And I find that in my experience. The more I work with this material, so we survey 40,000 people a month, and we've done that for many years, and we're doing lots of research, but that's only great at a certain level, because then you got to test it. You got to be in the room and test it. And the best ideas come out of the very thing you're about to do. When you sit there and this doesn't land, or somebody gives you a way more concrete way to think about it, you're like, and it just boom. And I learned, this is your point, I learned as much from kind of reteaching and that play, that they kind of almost literally play with ideas. And then I think that's what makes ideas stick. Because at the end of the day, again, we're all so busy, and the way our brain works, we can't hold on to a lot of ideas at any one time. So we need stickiness. Stickiness matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you think that maybe just the truth should be enough, but it needs to be memorable in order to kind of cascade. Let me give you a common view on how culture changes that I know you've proven have at least 2 falsehoods that are commonly held to be true. If I want to transform culture, what I'm going to do is I'm going to develop a set of values that I will write down, and I'll illustrate them with some stories. And then I will cascade it down from the top of the organization down through the entire organization, mirroring, having leadership mirror that.
Yeah.
That doesn't work very often. For some reasons, it doesn't work.
Yeah. So it really comes to like a couple of really important empirical findings, but really important ideas. Number one, culture exists less across organizations and more on teams. The fundamental unit where culture exists is on a team. Okay, that's number one. And I'll come back to that in a second. But number two, how culture develops is really important to know. Culture is the stories of how things are done around here. That's their nice, simple definition. When we're under pressure, we have more cortisol in our brain. Cortisol is a stress hormone, for those who don't know. One of the things that cortisol does is that it sears in memory. So when you got that call at 2 or 3 in the morning, I did about my 12-year-old one day, which was just horrific. Cortisol will sear that memory in. When 9/11 happened, right? When whatever big event, when there's more cortisol in someone's brain, then that whatever is happening in that moment gets seared into their brain. Okay. Now, what does that have to do with culture? So culture exists on a team. You as a leader of a team, You can say, here are our values. But if under pressure, when people have more cortisol in their brain, the decisions you make in that moment, the behaviors you make in those moments, or that you engage in those moments, that's what gets seared into the brain of everyone on your team. That becomes the culture on your team. You can say we believe in integrity, but if you're Wells Fargo now and you're creating millions of fake accounts, forget your values. It's what you do under pressure when you have to hit your results. And by the way, that's heavy, but it's also, I hope everyone who's listening gets this. It's your biggest opportunity then. That's when you can shape culture in the hard moments, right? That's what people miss. So we see last 8%, which we haven't really identified. I should explain what last 8% is, but last 8% are your biggest opportunities to transform yourself and transform the culture on your team. So let me describe last 8%, because that's not fair. That's not fair to people. So some background first. To be high performing on a team, you need to take risks. It's the best empirical finding we have right now on what differentiates a high performing team is they take risks. What do I mean by that? Well, there's interpersonal, there's strategic, but let's talk interpersonal. They name an inconvenient truth. They actually say what's on their mind. They're open to feedback. They disagree, whatever it is, but they take an interpersonal risk. Now, here's the thing. The very same moment that we need to take a risk to be high performing, our brain, which has been designed to protect the body, save, survive, our brain defaults to protection, not risk in that same moment. And so there's this conflict. We call it the fundamental conflict of performance. And unless you can get over that and get really underneath that, people will not take risks. Okay, that's first big point. Second point is we wanted to quantify this. We're big quants folks, right? Imagine this now. So you're on a team. There's a risk that, again, I'm going to speak to all the listeners. For all of you who are listening, there's a risk you need to take on your team, strategic, interpersonal, whatever. There's a risk you need to take. Have a hard conversation. Let's use that one. And then there's a risk that you actually take. And there's a gap between the risk you should take and the risk you actually take. And that gap we quantified 7.56%. We rounded up to 8% in a study of 34,000 people. We know that when you want to go and have a hard conversation, most of us, we leave a gap, and that gap is everything.
Yep.
So one of the things we love to do in our work is to challenge people to become students of human behavior. It's why I love your work, because you're 100% in, just like you just kind of, self-disclosed just now. And I'll tell you the same. So when we hit a last 8%, we know that there's one of two predictable patterns, what we call them predictable default behaviors, that we respond in that moment. 68% of us avoid, 32% of us make a mess. So I think most people know what avoid means. I'll come back to that. That make a mess. I'm wanting to have a conversation with you. I'm thinking about it at 3 a.m. Now I get in the room and I come on way too strong, way too hot, and I have impact I don't intend. So our work is really to help people find a middle way between avoid, which 2/3 of us do, 68%, or make a mess. Now, for the record, I'm an avoider. So I've worked with as I like to say, I've either worked with a coach or therapist for the last 17 years. When my life is going well, it's a coach. When it's not going so well, it's a therapist. But the thing is that that's been the great, I hope, learning for me, which is, okay, on my senior team, I can avoid. Why? And I know why, because I want to be liked. I'm in a relative position of power, as are you, right? I started this company, I blah, blah, blah. And I feel the need to be liked. Imagine everyone, listener on your team who doesn't feel the same kind of, or isn't in the same power position. Imagine why they avoid. Because again, the worst thing they can do is to be excluded. So the brain defaults to protection, not risk. And that's why they're going to play it safe. And they're not. And just imagine for strategy, how can you execute your strategy? Get good ideas, right? People on this podcast love to play with new ideas, to be creative, to innovate. That will not happen unless you dig in, you decrease that gap from 7.56 to even to 5%. Great. Even those marginal gains make a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. Just a clarification question for the audience. Is this 8% of what?
Sure. So imagine, so there's there's a risk we need to take to be high performing on a team, whether it be, let's say, name an inconvenient truth. So you should be saying something in your gut, but the actual risk you take to say something, name something, is there's a gap of 7.56 below that. So there's a gap between what we think we should say and what we actually say. Someone asks for feedback. Do we say everything that we know we should say? No, we leave that gap. Why? For a bunch of reasons. One, because self-preservation ourselves. One, sometimes we don't want to upset others. So in some of our work, we've created a study of 72,000 people. We found that there's different cultures that enable risk taking. So imagine through our whole conversation here, we've identified need to take risks. Here's a percent that we avoid. Like in a conversation, we don't say that last 8%, or we don't make that hard decision. Okay. But then we know there's some cultures that actually enable that and some that don't. And so we've got a 2x2, and it's based on courage and connection. The largest concentration of this map is in the lower right-hand quadrant. So imagine courage is on the vertical, connection's on the horizontal. So a culture in the lower right-hand quadrant is low on courage, high on connection. We call that a family culture, right? And so we default to being nice, avoiding. It's an avoidant culture, and we don't name the hard thing. And so we want to both give people skills to internally. So again, let me go to some good research. People don't know this. Again, if you're in strategy, you need to know this. For somebody to speak up on your team, to have divergent ideas and communicate that, there's two things they need. So that person taking a risk, there's 50% of the factors that drive that risk comes from inside of them. So they need some capabilities and some confidence to use those capabilities, to speak up, to know how to. That's 50%, but fully 50% is what's in their environment. What's the culture on their team? So that's our work, is both give skills to that individual, but also build the culture on their team, fundamental unit where culture exists, so they can actually take that risk. Because you know, and I know, let's say you're in a room in Paraguay and you just got it. You've got the team humming. You know, you're a pretty sharp guy. You're charismatic. You're confident. You act in that room different than, let's say, you go to a hospital for someone. It's not life-threatening, but you go in and you're trying to find your way. You don't have any status in the hospital. You don't know your way around, and you act way less courageously. Yet you're the same person with the same skills. Why is that? Because 50% is the culture on a team. And I'll say this to everyone doing strategy. If you don't work on the culture on your team, you're going to have maybe even capable, confident people who will sit back, and they won't, because they are trying to protect themselves. They don't want to be excommunicated from their tribe.
Yeah. Got it. Do you mind just describing, maybe, or at least giving us the names of the other
Sure,
three?
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, for sure. So just to kind of get to behavioral, to make it concrete. So we say courage and connection, but really it's high care and high accountability. So the courage, it's more than this, but we try to reduce everything down to make it sticky. So think of high care and high accountability. In the upper left-hand quadrant, you have more courage, more accountability, but less care, less connection. We call that a transactional culture, upper left. Bottom left is low connection, low courage, or low care, low accountability. We call that a fear-based culture. So imagine we've got transactional upper left, fear-based lower left, family bottom right. That takes up 67% of all the cultures in this study of 72,000 people, which is amazing. Only 33% is in that upper right-hand quadrant of high care, high accountability. And what's interesting, you and I talked about this in other settings, but one of the things that I've been lucky enough to do is coach coaches in the NHL, NBA, NFL, Olympic coaches. And this is the characteristic, that upper right-hand quadrant, of the best. High care, high accountability. What does that mean? That means that the athlete, and I'm going to use this word literally, the athlete feels loved by that coach to such a degree, so high care, they know the intention of that coach so well that they can withstand high accountability, high good feedback. When the coach pushes that athlete and the athlete knows why they're being pushed, that's the key. So as you're listening out there and you're thinking thinking about your team, everyone out there, how can I build this upper right-hand quadrant of high care, high accountability? And that's literally the work we do with organizations around the world, is we help them, build their culture in months, not years, kind of at scale, at speed, with this map, with these skills.
I love the framework. And I get that you need to do that on a team by team basis, while you do the work there in the team. what I'm not sure if there is a linkage here, if not, we'll get back to that later, is in the research that I found for driving innovation from within, we see a very strong correlation between high levels of entrepreneurial intensity and financial performance and the ability to recruit and retain top talent. What drives higher levels of entrepreneurial activity are a number of factors, but there's kind of like four different buckets. But risk taking appears in three places. You need to have structural organizational structures that allow risk taking, a culture that allows risk taking, and you need to attract and develop people have a certain risk profile. They take smart risks. So risk is the only one that appears across three of them. And so there's clear linkage to financial performance if you could do that. So how do you do that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in just your definitions. So again, when we work with an organization, part of it is, it's a great question, is what's the structure? What's the performance management comp? All these things that help an organization communicate, signal, we value risk taking and we're going to reinforce it, through our structure. So that's one part. But the big thing is, because the fundamental unit of culture is on a team, the key is that manager, that people leader. So in our culture change system, we give them this structure. We call it a sprint to own the culture on their team. And so that's the bigger push. Like the structural pieces are there, not there, but it's on your team where you go, I feel that my coach, my manager has my back. They are modeling high care, high accountability. They still push me. That to me is the kind of the big piece. And the great news, it's interesting because people are busy, but managers in our experience so want to have something to build the culture on their team, but they don't know how sometimes, right? And they're busy and I'm not a facilitator. I don't know how to do it. But in fact, and that's our special sauce really, is to bring it to that level. So imagine this across a whole organization at the same time, we can have people leaders running this sprint. And so you actually get a peer pressure, which is amazing, right? So we do, without getting into all the specifics, but risk taking will only happen if people feel safe and they have the skills to take, to step in and kind of manage their brain under pressure. And that's where they really come together.
Yeah, I'd like to I know we're reaching towards the top of our time with you, but I think we need to also bring in pressure here because you talk about, pressure rising to the occasion, performing under pressure is the wrong way to think about it. And then pressure is this moment where the culture gets made. So just talk to us about those two things. If you don't mind.
Oh, that's great. But by the way, I've been interviewed on other podcasts. Not everyone does their homework. I love how you read and are on top of stuff, honestly, because that's a really important question. And here's kind of what you're getting at for the listener. When we're under pressure, there's a myth. And the myth is that people perform better under pressure. They rise to the occasion. That's utter bunk. Again, look at the data. Michael Jordan, most people on the podcast will know Michael Jordan. We're all of that age group. Michael Jordan shot worse under pressure. How do we know? What do we mean? Pressure situation being a free throw in overtime, up a point, down a point, tied, under 3 minutes left. Like, there's research done on this. Michael Jordan shoots worse in those pressure moments than his playoff or his season average. He shoots worse under pressure, consistent with every NBA player in the history of the game. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this so if you know that there's a chance that you actually will underperform under pressure, when you underperform, and here's the catch. So let me say this. Michael Jordan shot worse under pressure, but he was less worse than everyone else. And here's the thing. Everyone else, I don't know everyone else, but what I've seen, like I've been to 7 Olympic Games and worked with athletes. I can tell you this. When an athlete thinks, so imagine the story an athlete concocts. I'm going to my first Olympics. This is the highest level. I better be at my best in order to succeed. If that's the story, you're done because in your first Olympic game, you're going to underperform in the first 5 minutes. It's just like it happens every time.
Yeah,
because you're
highest
overwhelmed.
Pressure.
That's right. And so if the story is, I need to be better than I've ever been before to succeed. If all of a sudden I'm not being as good as I've been before, I can't succeed. And you get this downward spiral.
Yeah.
But instead you're like, no, I expect it. And when it comes, I got a tool to manage it. Let's go. And so I'm less affected. That's what Michael Jordan was, less affected than anyone else. And so that's where the pressure piece comes in. And then the second great question is, okay, but I thought it's in pressure moments when you're creating culture. It is. And so again, strategy officer, leader on listening to this, know this. You will make mistakes when you're under pressure, but can you own it? That's it. Can you sit there, come back to a meeting and go, you know what? I think I overreacted, team or David or Cayenne or whoever, and own it, because people will give you such a benefit of the doubt. It's one of the things that we're so afraid to not be perfect. We're so afraid to appear like we know everything. And that's actually a barrier to that intimacy that grows when you do admit a mistake, when you are just open and honest, because that's the truth of the situation. And that's why this whole idea of the last 8% opportunity, your last 8%, for most people, they avoid it. It feels bad in the body. I get it. If you can reframe that and say, when we have a last 8%, it's our biggest opportunity to grow the culture on our team. This is our biggest opportunity to differentiate from our competitors. All of a sudden now you're going to be more courageous, and you're going to build a culture that encourages this longer term, kind of courage, which is just, this. It's so exciting to see. People want to be on an adventure. They do. They want to be doing great things. And if you can be a more courageous organization, to build that's really what we do, build courageous organizations. People love it. They get so energized.
Yeah, I love it. I've got 15 more questions, but we're reached the top of our time with you. But the great thing is that you've got an amazing book. You've got other materials. You've got this podcast that we can listen to walking every morning. How can people best connect with you and continue to learn from you?
Yeah. Reach out on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way. It's a weird name though. Hey, Pawliw-Fry, Pawliw-Fry. How do you remember that? That's hard. Go to our organization's website, which is IHHP, as in Peter.com. There's the podcast, a walking podcast that we've spent 25 years iterating for athletes that now is just freely available, which is a way to start your day, to manage your emotions and to be better in the last 8%.
Well, JP, thank you so much for the work that you do building on other people's research, doing your own proprietary research, and really giving us grounded, proven things that are also actionable and inspiring. So, and thank you for taking the time to share some of that with us here today.
Pleasure was all mine.